Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my LCK Round 1 overview and analysis of both of the series. They concluded just a day ago, and so I've had some time to process. I watched them, obviously, the day they happened, and then I rewatched them, tried to get as good of an analysis as I possibly could on what happened in these games, and I'm back here for my review of it. So if you guys are excited for that, let me know down in the comments section below. I'm going to be doing this for each round. So if you guys enjoy the content, feel free to let me know that down in the comment section below. It's really good to know what you guys like, what you guys don't. Obviously, I've premiered this already for the LPL, but this will be the first LCK version of it. So I'm excited to see what you guys think, but let's not waste too much time. We've got a lot to get into, so let's go ahead and jump right into our first series of the playoffs here, and we kicked off the playoffs with our 3-6 matchup in the first round, Liiv SANDBOX taking on DRX, and I was really excited for this series, mostly because I knew that it was going to be fun to watch these 280 carries go head-to-head. Obviously, the playstyles of both are very aggressive. I wanted to see which one would come out on top, and in Game 1, we definitely got a Liiv SANDBOX favored victory. This really wasn't all that close of a game, mostly because the jungle matchup was just over super early on. I really don't hate the Trundle into Poppy swap here for both teams. I think Poppy overall can hold her own in that matchup, and obviously so can Trundle, but Krako was just the better player by a significant margin here. Pyosik did not have a very good game. Krako was awesome. He was everywhere on the map, creating openings. Him and Kale actually teamed up to be a very fearsome duo later in the game, and the macro was just too much for DRX to handle. Even if they had some players that were relatively okay in the game, it didn't really matter. They didn't have the damage to be able to match. They weren't going to be able to cut through Trundle Ornn with a Yuumi on top of them. And there's just nobody on DRX's comp that's going to be able to outdamage a Sivir late game. Lucian's not going to be able to do that, especially if he didn't win early, which he did not here. So overall, I think Krako's advantage early in the game was a big reason why this team was just kind of steamrolled over, if you will. Krako's easily going to get my player of the game here for Liiv SANDBOX. Like I said, really, really good on the Trundle, impacting lanes early, able to completely shut down Pyosik in that jungle matchup. Really nothing that Pyosik could do. However, he did also play bad. Like Pyosik, it's not just Krako playing good, it was also Pyosik playing a little bit bad. We're seeing a lot of jungle bans come out in order to target Krako, but if you're just going to leave up something like the Trundle, he's going to happily take that. He's going to feel very comfortable about it. Like, it felt very targeted in draft, where the Vi, the Skarner, the Wukong, all gone from Krako, some of his most played champions, but it's not like Trundle's a bad matchup into Poppy at all. I really don't understand the draft strategy here from DRX. Going Lucian Nami here, I think, is fine, so long as you focus that lane hard with Zika early. And you just didn't. Yeah, of course, LeBlanc wants to get ahead early in the game, especially against Ahri, and that also did not happen here in Game 1. Zika was behind a little bit early, which meant that Closer was able to be a little bit more proactive on the map, just overall. I would say a good game generally by Liiv SANDBOX, mostly facilitated by Krako and Kale, but supplemented, I think, well by the rest of the team here, Closer and Prince. This is honestly the least, I don't know, the least talkable game that they played. Everything else, I think, had some really strong talking points, but this was just kind of Trundle getting super far ahead. You have a Yuumi and an Ornn to serve as frontline, and then you have Ahri and Sivir for damage, and quite frankly, DRX playing from behind just didn't have the damage to be able to compete with that. But it wasn't all just, why were they playing from behind? Well, you have to focus on this bot lane early. Obviously, you want to bring Zika. You want to bring Pyosik to Deft and Barrel. Unfortunately, like I said, Zika went even in lane, so there was never really a ton of opportunity for you to roam. Closer did a good job of closing out Zika's opportunities to get ahead on that LeBlanc, and Pyosik just did not give bot lane the attention it needed. He was very focused on his own game, and I think it very much hurt the team as a whole. I see a lot of people criticizing the Aatrox pick from King in the top lane. I absolutely think that can be a relatively good pick. Maybe not as specifically in this matchup because of the sustain and the overall tankiness of Liiv SANDBOX's team with the Ornn, the Trundle, the Yuumi keeping everybody alive, the spell shield on Sivir. There is a lot that can be done to outplay Aatrox, but I think Aatrox generally as a blind pick is actually not that bad in the meta right now. I think there are a lot of things that he just causes problems for, and especially if you want to go for this bigger late game 5v5 team fighting comp, I think Aatrox can actually supplement that really well. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out here. mostly because DRX is just not good at team fighting. We've seen this throughout the year pretty unanimously. When DRX wins, it's often because they get some pretty big lane leads. Mostly it's Zika getting a pretty big lane lead and just being able to translate that into, you know, moving around and securing objectives. But in 5v5 team fights, this team honestly has not been all that good this year, and that's been pretty obvious to watch. So I don't really understand drafting a comp that's like, I mean, I get the Lucian Nami, but I don't get the Aatrox and the LeBlanc in that respect, because it very much makes me feel like you want to fight, which would play right into Liiv SANDBOX's hands, in my opinion. But overall, a very good win for Liiv SANDBOX in Game 1. That brings us then to Game 2, where Liiv basically just runs it back and gets another big win here. It's a little bit of a different game plan here, mostly because the drafts are significantly different. I like DRX's draft, but again, execution on this draft is very poor. You basically stopped targeting the junglers here from DRX, and you've gone to targeting the AD carries. No Lucian, no Nyla, no early game problems. You want to play that Zeri, and you give Beryl the Leona to be able to create plays. The problem is, you just aren't as good. And that's a little bit of an issue when Prince is just able to be better than Deft and kind of style on the lane. Does it really matter that you have the Leona? The Kayle keeps Prince so ridiculously safe, and he gets super online due to some runs here by Pioshik overall. But once Prince gets online, it's basically GG. There's really nothing they can do. His positioning has been perfect throughout the entirety of this split, and Krako does a great job of enabling that. And when you get to that point, like, Prince is just going to win you the game. Like, it's really GG once he's super far ahead, and that's kind of what happened here. He wasn't the only player on the team to play well, even if he is my player of the game, which he is. Prince is my player of the game because he dominated those late game team fights on Aphelios. But you have to shout out Closer, who also played really well. Now, you have to give a little bit of credit here to Zika, who played a really bad game of Swain. There's really no other way to put that, but Closer, I think, took advantage of that well, mostly because a lot of the advantages that Closer got were from pressuring out Zika and then moving somewhere else. And I think that's a really, like, that's how you want to play Ahri. Krako and Closer, I think, have definitely formed a much better mid-jungle duo in the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 weeks of the season here than they had at any point before that. I think a lot of that has been Closer getting more comfortable here. They're forcing him on Assassins, which I think is overall good for him. We've seen that he's just, like, when he plays control mages, he's maybe the worst mid laner in any major region in the world, but on Assassins, he's very much a good mid laner here. And you get him on these champions that can kind of roam the map and cause impact in other lanes, and I think he's a lot better. Krako's done a lot better of a job of playing around mid lane, something that, quite frankly, they just didn't do for a majority of the season. They were bot lane, bot lane, bot lane all the time. I think getting those three, or getting those two on the same page and then being able to translate that to the bot lane is kind of the best of both worlds. Not only does Closer get fed here, Prince gets fed, Kayle does a great job of keeping everyone safe, and then you still have an Ornn in team fights if you really want a 5v5. Which this comp is really good at, I should note, because you have a Aphelios Vi Ornn. So overall, just a really, really strong comp from Liiv SANDBOX, and I think they pulled it off incredibly well. I think this shows the evolution of their playstyle and their ability to be more versatile in these games, where I think, like I said, early in the season, Prince and Kayle were kind of the only ones that were able to get pressure, because Closer was super underperforming, but I think Closer has found his niche of like, well, I'm just going to pick Ahri or LeBlanc every game, and I'm going to shove and roam. And that's very much worked out for Liiv, and I think it's made them a better team. But in moving to DRX, a tough loss here. I think Deft played all right. There was only so much you could do, but, I mean, there was really no plays to set up here. The Leona into Aphelios Tahm Kench is just not a good pick. Overall, Leona is not very good in the meta right now. She's not nearly tanky enough to be able to survive the all-ins like that, and that's a problem. But really, I think this boils down to, again, jungle diff, where I think Krako and Closer were doing a really good job of being able to conglomerate and then move bot lane or move to an objective and be able to secure that for the team. I think Pioshik and Zika obviously were so far behind at that point that basically every macro play that Liiv SANDBOX wanted to make was completely free. Pioshik was a bad player. He was the worst player, I think, in this, so he's going to get my dud of the game, but Zika's build almost single-handedly deserves him dud of the game. So, you know, if you wanted to give to Zika, I completely understand the Swain was not a very useful pick at all here. I can see where they were coming from with this idea, but overall, I think it's significantly too passive to try and play in a high-pressure playoff series, especially when you know the jungle mid duo wants to play for bottom lane. It's not like they're trying to play around the Swain, which is how Swain mostly thrives. So overall, Pioshik and Zika just got completely outplayed in this game, and it was really, really tough to watch. They did attempt to make some plays towards the back half, but man, I can't stress enough. I think DRX is a decent team, but they cannot team fight. Like, this team cannot 5v5, and it really has become a problem for them. I really don't know why you draft Zeri Swain if you feel like you are struggling in 5v5 team fights, but like, that's what we had. We had Zeri Swain, and this team tried to fight later, and they were behind in gold, and I mean, Zeri had a little bit, but man, like, they just aren't good. They're spaced out. Somebody's late to the fight every time. They don't really know who's on frontline duty. It isn't a good look from DRX in these 5v5s. They're much better at the early aggression. So when they fall behind, I get really worried about this team overall. But another good win for Liiv, putting themselves up 2-0. This is looking pretty predictable at this point. Liiv looked like the better team going into the series, and they very much look like the better team in this series. But we move on to game 3 here, where DRX is able to take a game here, which has got to be super good for them. Very much confidence boosting. The draft here is very risky, and I kind of like it. You go back to your jungle-focused bans here. If you're DRX, you ban out the Vi, you ban out the Trundle, you ban out the Wukong. Except this time, instead of the Skarner, like I said, you ban out the Trundle. So Krako's put on the Skarner, basically, you know, daring him to make plays. And this was the right way to do it. Like, clearly Krako is significantly less experienced on the Skarner than he is on those other picks. This was a very weak game, I think, overall from Krako. Not all his fault, but definitely mostly his fault. But let's praise DRX for a second. Really like how they played this game. Zika had a huge bounce back, some really stylish plays on Azir in this game. Obviously, I was criticizing him for his Swain in game 2, but I think he was definitely the player of the game here in game 3, like he has been for most of DRX's wins, quite frankly. I know a lot of people talk about Deft as being the best player on this team. For me, it has pretty clearly been Zika, even if he does have a little bit lower lows. I will take the high highs that Zika gives you over the consistent, like, relatively good of Deft. Like, not that Deft is bad, he's still above average, but he's just that, above average. I don't think at any point this season he's ever been great. And so, Zika, I think at points has been great. He was great in this game. So he's going to get my player of the game on the Azir. I don't think a lot of people are going to be angry with that. You also have Beryl, who I want to give a big shout out to. Obviously, I've been very harsh on Beryl throughout most of the year. I think he's had so many moments where it's just been question mark pangs from me of what are you doing? But without his hooks this game is significantly harder for DRX. He did a great job on the Nautilus of being able to engage and being able to basically shut down the Zeri, which is a really, really tough job for a Nautilus to actively do consistently. Not only that, but you have to play with the Nyla into Zeri, which is generally like a really tough matchup. Nyla struggles really hard to be able to burst her down because she has so much of that mobility, especially with the Lulu. To be able to get her online really requires a lot of consistent positioning, both from your Azir, your Poppy, and from your Nautilus. But yeah, I thought everybody on that side did a really good job, but mostly Zika and Beryl. Pioshik had a much better game here, even if it wasn't perfect. He did what he needed to do on the Poppy. He didn't have to take over the game. He let Zika and Beryl be the more aggressors, and he played that more supportive role, something that we've seen him succeed on in the past, more on those super team DRX teams than when, you know, he kind of got some confidence under his belt. But this style, I think, definitely works for him, and it definitely works for DRX. Kinging on the Jax in the top lane, very, very scary to go into once he got ahead. Got some free kills in some 5v5s around Dragon. I think every Dragon was fought for in this game, but he was able to translate that into some huge pressure on the other sides of the map. So really, overall, just a really good game from DRX. Not a lot to say negative about them in this one. They were really, really solid, especially Zika and Beryl had some pretty god hooks. Moving on to SANDBOX, not the worst. You know, you're up 2-0. You get a little bit cocky here. Krako comes in. He goes, I'm just going to win the game now. I'm going to end it. And he ends up running it quite a bit, which is fine. Krako's going to get my dead of the game here on Skarner. It's not like the most like panic-inducing game of all time or anything like that. Prince still was able to get gold. It was just a really good job from Beryl to be able to stop him in those team fights around Dragon, to be able to lock him down for Zika or Deft to be able to blow him up. Kale not really doing his job perfectly this game. He was supposed to be a lot of protection, but again, Prince was just out of position quite a bit in the mid-game, so only so much you can do there. Dove got outplayed by Kingin, and Closer got outplayed by Zika. Pretty much just a DRX win. Like, there really was no shenanigans, I think, to this. It was just DRX kind of being a good team. But moving on to the fourth game here, we end the series. DRX showed us a little bit of light here in Game 3, but Liiv SANDBOX is able to take Game 4 and therefore take the series 3-1 here. A really good AD carry battle here. That's really what it was. It was just a battle of the AD season. Unfortunately for DRX and unfortunately for Deft, he was on Lucian, so he was never going to be able to win this against the Aphelios. I thought Closer played really well in this as well, but really the storyline was Prince versus Deft, as was my key matchup of the series, as was pretty much all the talk surrounding the series. Prince versus Deft was always going to be how the series ended, and Prince got the better of him, which I think just kind of showcases how good of a year Prince has had, and, how confident I feel in the fact that Prince is one of the top, I don't know, 5 to 8 80 carries in the world, somewhere in that range. But Liiv SANDBOX did really, really well here. Pretty phenomenal game from them. Prince and Kale are just such a great duo. I really like Kale on the Tahm Kench. He's played that champion at a super high level all year long. It's been one of their best picks. The Aphelios Kench has been a lane they go to. They even run the Sivir Kench sometimes, but I think the Aphelios is significantly better here. Obviously, Sivir banned out. If you don't have that option, I understand. Krako gets to play Poppy for the first time in the series. Pioshik tries to go to his counter, the Morgana here, which I don't hate. I think, I've talked about this in the past. I think Morgana can relatively work. I get it. You want to play it with something like the Renekton in the top lane. You want to have that early game threat here on the Ornn. But overall, I just don't find that strategy to be consistent. And especially with this draft, you're just indexing so hard into the early game. This is something I talk about all the time on the channel, where I hate the Lee Sin plus Lucian Nami combo. I get it, but we can dominate the early game, but Lee Sin falls off super hard. Lucian needs Peel in the late game in order for him to do well, and a lot of that just isn't going to come from what you have here. I think Renekton Morgana definitely falls under that category. I very much don't like indexing this hard into an early game draft. I get wanting to go Lucian Nami here because you want to try and get ahead of Prince, because once Prince gets that lead, if he can get ahead, it's very difficult to stop him, and I think Lucian into Aphelios is a super winnable Lucian lane, but the problem with that is if Prince doesn't get behind, then all of a sudden you're in a situation where Aphelios is going to scale significantly harder, and who else on this team is going to keep up with him? It's not going to be the Renekton, it's not going to be the Lissandra, so you're putting yourself in a really, risky position, I think, by drafting this comp, and unfortunately, it just did not work out. I don't think Pioshik played it perfectly here. On the Morgana, not only do you have to make early game plays, you have to be super far ahead in farm, you have to be super far up in gold, and he just straight up wasn't. Even if this was a relatively boring game that was close, mostly because of, DRX's ability to play, deft. I shouldn't say DRX, I should say deft and Barrel's ability to play late game. It just was never going to go that way based on draft. They put themselves in such a hole that they had to outplay their opponents so much to even be in that spot. I have to talk about Barrel just for a second. Void Staff on Nami. I'm not going to go into this too much, but because Twitter already has, but don't build Void Staff on Nami. Magic Pen does literally nothing on her, so just don't do it. There's actually no point. But yeah, Liiv SANDBOX takes this series here 3-1. Overall, player of the series for me was a little up in the air, I think, for a little bit, but it is going to go to Prince. I definitely debated putting it on Krako. I think Prince and Krako both definitely played this really well, but Prince definitely, I think, deserves player of the series for his Game 2 and his Game 4 performances, especially his Game 4 here, where he was able to close out the series on that Aphelios. But Krako, like I said, played really well. I thought Closer actually had a really good series. I think he played Ahri every single game. That's kind of the strategy I think you want for Closer. If you can get him on Ahri every single game, then get him on Ahri. I think when you're looking at ways to draft around this team, banning jungle threats, I think, is definitely a way to go, but I think also banning Ahri is also the way to go. I think the banning of Sivir is just kind of pointless, and I don't mean that in a way where Prince isn't good at Sivir, but Prince is just as good at Aphelios. If you're going to ban one, I think you have to ban the others, so. And then Dove, if you want to take him off the Ornn, great. He's going to be on tank duty. If it's not the Ornn, it's going to be the Sejuani. If it's not the Sejuani, it's going to be the Gnar. They're just going to put him on something super safe up in their top lane, and it's not going to be too much of a problem, so. Drafting around Liiv SANDBOX, I do think is possible, but I think it definitely, in my opinion, starts with taking away the assassins from Closer. But overall, I think Liiv SANDBOX played it really well. As for DRX, unfortunate end to their season. Not the way you wanted to go out. Obviously, they didn't look all that good going into this week. Not too much of a surprise, but if this really is the last time we see Deft, obviously we'll see him in the regional qualifiers as well, but if this really is the last time we majorly see Deft, it is unfortunate. This was a great game for him, and unfortunately the team just wasn't able to pick it up. Pioshik was a huge hindrance in the series for DRX. He played really, really garbage. He was easily the dud of the series. I don't give it out in the playoffs, but if I did, it certainly would be him. Definitely some interesting item choices from Zika in Game 2, from Beryl in Game 4, Kingin on Renekton in Game 4. A lot of options here that I think DRX could have gone in a different direction and maybe put themselves in a better spot overall, but just wasn't going to happen. So overall, DRX definitely had their shot, and they're going to live, as a team that had all of this talent, was just never able to put it together Should have been a top 4 team, but ended up being out in the first round of the playoffs. But it's definitely going to be interesting. Hopefully Liiv SANDBOX can take this win and move on and, have some confidence moving into that next round. Moving on to our second series here in the first round of the LCK playoffs, and this one was one I think a lot of people were really excited to see. Definitely some mixed opinions about favorites and underdogs in this series, but we are talking about the 4-5 series between DAMWON KIA and KT Rolster. Definitely an interesting one. I was looking forward to this. I know a lot of people in the comments section were looking forward to this series. Some people really thought DAMWON had this in the bag. Some people really thought KT had this in the bag. Let's see how things played out. We get it started here with Game 1. And kicking off Game 1 with the DAMWON win. A really, really convincing DAMWON win. They were basically in control from minute 1 and just never lost control. They were able to completely outplay KT Rolster, and definitely some weird macro mistakes from KT to make it even worse. My player of the game is going to go to DAMWON in the bot lane here on the Lucian Nami. I talk about the Renekton Lucian Nami pick, not being good. But, like, holy crap. Like, DAMWON was so good this game on Lucian that it almost didn't matter. Like, typically I would look at these two drafts and I would hate DAMWON's draft because I do kind of hate DAMWON's draft. But they were able to execute on it, which is always more important. I talk about this all the time on this channel. I've said it, I think, a lot. Where I think a lot of people tend to blame draft, I think, for a lot of problems in games. But truly, at the end of the day, execution matters significantly more than draft. And you can have a draft that I don't like DAMWON's, and a draft that I do like KT Rolster's, and DAMWON can absolutely obliterate them because they just played it better, and that's what happened in this game. DAMWON and Kellen were awesome on the Lucian Nami. They were able to completely dominate that Zeri Lulu bottom lane. Very, very good from them. Obviously, that was a matchup I think a lot of people were looking at as KT favored moving into the playoffs here because Aiming has been having such a good series, but for DAMWON to come out in Game 1 and really dominate laning phase in the way that he did on the Lucian is really promising. Showmaker got a good lead in the mid lane on the LeBlanc, had to be happy about that. And then Canyon was just able to do things, like Wukong was able to move around the map. I think that's often been a problem for Canyon, mostly because Showmaker has been kind of tethered to the mid lane, I think, for a majority of the year, but Canyon did a good job of opening up the map here, making sure that the bot lane had a lot of pressure, and also making sure everybody was safe. Now, one thing I haven't even talked about yet, my matchup of the series, my key matchup of the series was top lane here, and unfortunately, we didn't even get it, because before the series, I'm not sure the exact reason. I believe I've read some places that it's been a neck injury, or at least neck tightness from Nuguri, but he did not play in the first round of the playoffs here. Bertle came in, that was the big decision, and he was the primary shot caller this whole series, for good and for bad, and trust me, we will get to that, but Bertle comes in the top lane, and he does fine here, doesn't really have to do too much as the Renekton. Quite frankly, the game was played pretty much without him for a majority of the game, but he was fine here in Game 1. Just definitely something worth noting. No Nuguri in the top lane in this series. It is going to be Bertle in the top lane. He did not play a single game in the regular season this split, and he comes in and is going to be playing the entire playoff series for DAMWON. But overall, just a really, really good showing from DAMWON, a really good showing from their bot side. Mostly, they were able to get a lead early and just kind of stick to it, crush it out of the park, be able to control the macro game, and just end the game relatively quickly. Just a good showing overall from DAMWON. But then you had KT Rolster. Like, bad macro. I think that's the first thing that pops out to me, is they made some really, really weird macro mistakes in this game, giving up objectives for nothing, getting objectives and giving up, like, major objectives, giving up tower and inhibitor for Dragon, like, giving up Nexus for Baron, like, weird calls from KT Rolster that they've just, I don't really know where their head was at with them, but they didn't even play all that well in the early game. Unfortunately, they had to play so much from behind here. DAMWON was able to get such a lead here because he was just better than Aiming in laning phase, quite frankly. And that's kind of a trend with Aiming. Obviously, we can talk up Aiming a lot in terms of his performance this split, but he is still Aiming. Like, this is still the guy. We've seen him play for years and years and years. It's not like his playstyle has completely changed. He has never been a lane-dominant AD carry. He's never been someone who is going to be super strong in laning phase, especially if he's on a matchup that is supposed to scale. So, yeah, he can do well when he gets out of laning phase most of the time if he's not positioned so poorly that he's running it. But most of the time, he's fine. But when he gets behind in lane like this, against a Lucian Nami, like, that is a recipe for disaster, and that's basically what DAMWON was looking to exploit in this game, and I think they did a really good job of that. Along with that, I don't think Cuz was all that good in this game. I think Viego generally is a little bit of a troll pick. I don't think it's all that good, especially on 12-14. I think Wukong just has so much more pressure. I think if you had like a Poppy there in the jungle, I think you're looking at a significantly different game here for KT Rolster. But, you know, it is what it is. Hopefully they can shore up a lot of their weaknesses. Nobody in this game really played all that dominant other than maybe Dektum. And nobody in this game played really all that bad, maybe with the exception of aiming. Other than that, it was really just DK being better. They had better macro sense, KT making some weird calls, and DK being able to end the game. There was some moments where it felt like DK could do some stuff, but overall it wasn't that big of a deal. So DAMWON comes out with the Game 1 lead, and that brings us into Game 2 here. And Game 2 was another DAMWON win. They go up 2-0 in the series. A huge win for DAMWON. 2-0 is a huge death sentence for a lot of teams, statistically speaking, in the LCK, and just in playoffs in general. In best of fives, it's really hard to come back from a 2-0. And again, it was off the back of Dektum just playing really, really great. He goes off on the Draven this game instead of the Lucian. Another pick that I think he's been really good on all year long. They put a lot of priority into him. They drafted Taliyah Poppy to be able to support that Draven pick a lot. I talk about this all the time on the channel. If you draft Draven, you better be prepared to invest in that pick. And they did. They absolutely did. Dektum just got the ball rolling, and he was really never going to stop. Draven snowballs harder than any champion in the game right now. He did a really good job with that. But overall, I like this draft a lot more from DAMWON. Even the Yone in the top lane I think is a lot more interesting here than the Renekton. I think it basically does what the Renekton wants to do, but does it just at different parts of the game. Creates a lot of panic for the backline of the enemy team. Creates a lot of problems in the late game team fight while also being a mostly damage dealing tank, right? Like, he's still relatively tanky. He's not a tank. He's not Sejuani or Ornn or something like that, but he is relatively bulky. He basically plays like a bruiser at this point with his item build, and so overall, I think I just like this Yone pick a little bit more than what I liked out of the Renekton in Game 1, but I don't think this game was really all about top lane at all. Again, even if Bertle had some moments where it was like, what are you doing? This was, again, a bot lane game. This was Canyon going bot. This was Showmaker going bot. This was Dektum and Kellen being the focal point for DAMWON and doing a really good job with it. I think Showmaker as well also had some pretty phenomenal moments here in this game on the Taliyah. Was pretty much everywhere in the map, creating a lot of plays. I think Broadcast gave player of the game to Taliyah, but for me, Dektum was just so out of control with the damage on Draven, and he was doing such a good job both early and mid-game to create so much panic and so much pressure on KT Rolster that it was a pretty easy choice for me to pick Dektum as my player of the game here. But Kellen also deserves some credit. Obviously, it's hard to be super great on Braum, you know, super like high skill expression on Braum, because there's only so much you can do at the pro level on that champion. Everybody knows what he's supposed to do, so if you're not running into him, it's kind of difficult for him to get all his shit off. He's just going to be protection for Dektum, but he did his job. He was able to keep Dektum alive for a really large portion of these team fights, set Showmaker up for a really, really good portion of his plays, and overall, just a really good game from the DK, quadra part of the map, like the bottom four. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to sound cool, and it's definitely failing. But moving over to KT, again, they just looked outclassed in this game. They just didn't look like they were on the same wavelength. A pretty poor game here from Vikla on the Azir, multiple times being outpositioned in the mid lane, but also just, if you're going to be playing Azir into Taliyah, you have to get ahead, because this Taliyah is going to be able to roam, and you're just not going to be able to match it. So you really do have to be able to get your own lead and be able to team fight, get really strong, and Vikla just wasn't able to do that on the Azir in this game. It's really not a pick that I think he's all that proficient on. Quite frankly, I think he's much more proficient on these super aggressive, more macro-oriented picks. That's always what Vikla, I think, has done throughout the season. That definitely showed up here. There is something worth noting. I'm not going to talk about it too much because I'm not, I don't want it to define the series, but there was a pretty huge bug in this game. Rascal on Ornn could actually not upgrade Aiming's Immortal Shield Bow, which is pretty bad, and they didn't reset for it, which feels unbelievable, but they just let it play. I imagine that was KT's decision to keep letting it play, and Aiming just wasn't able to upgrade Shield Bow this game, so that's not ideal, but at the end of the day, like, DAMWON was in a position where they probably should have won that game even if Aiming had the ability to upgrade it, so, I'm not going to sit here and say that things would have changed too much, but it is something worth noting that that was a pretty big bug that happened in this game. But overall, just KT kind of got outplayed and out-macroed especially. Again, Showmaker was everywhere on the map. Dektum was able to open up the bot lane a lot just by being, quite frankly, better in the early game here on the Draven, getting a lot more assistance than Aiming got, and from that point onwards, it was just snowballed out of control. Once you get Draven on that path, it's basically GG's, so... then, yeah, now we're sitting here at 2-0. DAMWON sitting here at 2-0, feeling really good. We move into Game 3 here, which is a KT win. So KT picks up a win, keeps their series and their season, at least in playoffs, alive. They have locked Regional Gauntlet with the DRX loss, but they keep their playoff series alive, mostly off the back of Vikla on the Sylas. Big shout out here. I've been really harsh on Vikla for a good portion of this series so far, especially in that game 2. I didn't think he was all that good on the Azir, but he gets back on his signature pick here, the Sylas. They leave it up for him. He takes it and he dominates. Like, this is what I want to see out of Vikla. I want to see him playing aggressive, and I want to see him playing picks that can make their own plays around the map, not just in the mid lane. And that absolutely happened here. He completely outplayed Showmaker in the mid lane. Not only was he able to get a huge lead in the mid lane, which is what he should have done last game, but he was able to create that impact elsewhere on the map as well. I don't think it was just him. Again, I think Cuz actually did a pretty good job this game on the Wukong of creating pressure in multiple spots. But a lot of this was just like outplaying of the jungle mid. Like, jungle mid just super outplayed here. Aiming and Life had a good game, but honestly, they weren't like dominant or anything in the bottom lane. They picked the Lucian Nami in order to try to beat the Aphelios Lulu scaling lane, and I guess it kind of works. Like, Aphelios and Lulu still get online, but the Lucian Nami were still relatively effective. But overall, I would definitely say the two players that were the most impactful in this game were the Wukong and the Sylas. I really do like the Swain pick, by the way. The double flex here, I think, is incredibly strong. You can have the Swain go to the mid lane and have the Sylas go in the top lane, or you can have them switch, which is what they did here. They had the Swain go top, and I think Swain's actually a really underrated top pick right now, especially if the tanks are going to be picked blind, because tanks, honestly, they just want to scale. So does Swain. Swain's totally fine with this ridiculously passive lane that Ornn is going to give him. Rascal does a good job of playing it out, is able to be super influential in team fights later on in the game because he's Swain, and he can never die as long as he's even. So overall, I really like this draft from KT Rolster, and I thought they executed on it really well. But at the end of the day, this was Vikla getting player of the game and being really, really great on the Sylas, and Cuz doing all he can to help him out there. As for DAMWON, not a great game here. Mid-jungle just got outplayed. There's really no other way to put it. Canyon and Showmaker were not that good in this game, and that's definitely concerning because it's not the first time that these two have been outplayed this season. Obviously, I'm significantly higher on Canyon than I think a majority of LCK fans are, but Showmaker I have been very concerned about. He did not make any of my all-pro teams. He was someone I have been genuinely concerned about the play of. He played really well in Game 2 here on the Celia, but now he gets in a matchup where Vikla's actively trying to stop what he's doing, and Vikla did a great job of that. He put Showmaker in a really awkward position, and Showmaker really didn't respond all that well, so definitely a little concerning in that regard. Bertle also was just a complete non-factor in the top lane. Like I said, this Swain-Ornn matchup was super boring for a majority of the game, and then once we got to that point, like, Swain was just able to team fight, and Ornn wasn't able to actively help his team at all. So definitely not the greatest game there from Bertle in the top lane, and then Dektum and Kellen in the bot lane, I actually thought played relatively well, as well as they could. They're definitely the best performing members of DAMWON in this series so far. Dektum definitely showed up on the Aphelios. He just didn't have a lot of help from the rest of his team. I think if he had a little bit more gold, this game might have been at least a little bit closer, but unfortunately, KT kind of dominated that mid game, and so KT was just in there and was dominating. So great win for KT. Super happy for them. Like, this is the exact win you need in Game 3 to inspire some confidence. They have a strategy that I think they're going to be happy to go back to here, which is get Vikla on these roaming playmaking mid laners to be able to impact the map and force Showmaker to be contested. That's something that I think he struggled with a lot this year. Also, if Canyon wants to pick Viego, let him pick Viego. This pick did not work at all. Not in Game 1, not in Game 3. So if people are going to keep picking Viego, let them. It's clearly not a pick that is that strong here on 12-14, and I just don't think a lot of people have realized that yet. So you have that. But that does it for Game 3 analysis. Definitely a fun one from KT, but that means we can move on to Game 4 here, and it's another KT win. Can the reverse sweep happen? That would be absolutely huge for KT, and they put themselves in a pretty great position to actively do that here. Another really good game from Vikla, again on the Sylas. This is a pick that he has clearly shown some proficiency in, not only in this playoff series, but I think generally over the course of the split so far. Sylas has been his #1 in terms of success rate. And even with DAMWON playing such a strong game here, they just made a few too many mistakes towards the back half of the game. Vikla was able to take over. He used the Violets incredibly successfully and was able to dominate that team fight with the help of aiming here on the Aphelios. Overall, just a really good game from Vikla. He's going to get my player of the game again here in Game 4. He was really, really solid. When he's on the Sylas, KT is in a much, much better spot. That is a pretty easy draft choice for me to make if I'm playing against KT to ban in Game 5. But he wasn't the only one on the team playing well. I actually thought Cuz had another really good game here. And so did Aiming. You gotta shout out Aiming on the Aphelios. Sometimes Aiming can be in a really bad position if he feels like he's too ahead. But he did a really good job here of making sure he didn't go for those risky flash Aphelios plays that he sometimes does. You know, with Aphelios trying to tank all that damage. He played the backline really well, was able to support Vikla on that Sylas, who really just could not die in the mid game here with Lulu buffs on him the entire game. Sylas was able to use Violet to get into the backline, was able to blow up a lot of what they wanted to do. And Aiming was doing a really good job of being that secondary damage dealer while also being someone who was never really in a position where he was in danger. So overall, really solid game from Aiming. And like I said, really solid game from Cuz, who was just kind of everywhere he needed to be at any point. But yeah, keep Vikla on Sylas forever. Like, I really don't see any point. I do want to point out, Life wasn't all that perfect in this game. While he was in a position, you know, he was in a really tough position because if you're going to all in on the Sylas, like, Lulu needs to be with the Sylas to be able to make that effective, and unfortunately, Lulu can just not be in the places where Sylas is and not be a huge target, so fortunately, Life was just kind of targeted a bit in this and was dying pretty early in team fights, but it's hard for me to blame him entirely for this significantly because he had to be in the position where, you know, he wasn't always going to be in the best spot, so yeah, he had to use a lot of his shit on himself, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. As for DAMWON, they were certainly in this game. Like, Dektum had a ton of gold in this. Kellen was doing a really good job of keeping him alive in fights. The problem with that is all of their gold was on Nyla. And Nyla's just not very good right now. And I don't know why teams keep going to her, because obviously it's not like they're super practiced on her. They've at most like a month to be able to practice with her. And I get that they probably played a lot of games in the past month, but she just feels like a slightly worse Samira to me right now. In the sense of, I really do think she can go in and do damage, but it's just not consistent damage, and she has to risk so much to get there. I just never see her being all that worth it, and we definitely saw that in the end game here. Like, Nyla had all the gold, and there was absolutely no way she was ever going to be able to win these team fights. She just never had enough damage to actively be able to kill this Sylas. She was never, ever going to be in a position to actually get on Aphelios, so I don't really know what the point of this pick is. Overall, just not a good... I mean, Dektum and Kellen, I thought, played it fine, but it's just, you can only do so much on the pick. I thought Canyon also had a relatively decent game here, even if the macro towards the back half of this game was bad, and I don't know whether to blame that on Bertle or whether to blame that on Canyon or Kellen or Showmaker or whoever was making the calls here. Some of the macro here on DK was just really not good. Standing there and waiting for KT to take the objective and then fighting them just never is a good idea, and giving up on objectives basically for free, which Canyon did at multiple points throughout the game, was just very weird calls from DAMWON. Very similar to what KT was doing in Game 1, just not like nonsensical decision making. So while Canyon, I thought, played some of the team fights at least okay, at the end of the day, like, he made some really, really poor decisions that very well cost DK the series in the game here. So overall for DAMWON, not the best game, but not the worst game in the world. I gave Showmaker dead of the game here, mostly because he was, like, the least influential, but I don't really think anybody on DAMWON was all that bad. I really just think it was KT playing better and some really bad macro decisions from DAMWON. But nobody was really that bad in terms of actually playing out the game, in my opinion. But DAMWON definitely needs to bounce back here. This Game 5 is going to be absolutely crucial. If they get reverse swept, that is hilarious, but they definitely don't want that to happen. As for KT Rolster, they put themselves in a great position. I don't imagine Vikla's going to be allowed to get Sylas in Game 3, but he has really been huge or Game 5, I should say, but he has been huge for them in Games 3 and 4, and you hope that can continue. So, moving on now to the penultimate Game 5. It was an absolute doozy with an unbelievable finish, and the winner was DAMWON. DAMWON is able to take the game. They avoid the reverse sweep by winning Game 5 and moving themselves on to the semifinals in the LCK, but, whew, like, this game was close. This game was close, and you maybe don't get it from, like, the score, but holy crap, like, KT threw the game. They were in a great position to actively win this. They had a Zeri that, quite frankly, I don't think could have died in a team fight here on Aiming, but, oh, I guess I'll just skip to it. I guess I'll skip to how this game ended. KT Rolster makes the decision to go for Cloud Soul. Bertle or whoever is making that call is screaming on the mic to just end the game, and they do. KT Rolster trades Cloud Soul for Nexus, and DAMWON, they don't prep the, KT doesn't prep the mid wave, and oh, it's just an absolute disaster, and it's got to be heartbreaking for KT Rolster, but DAMWON was the better team in this game for a majority of it. KT did a good job of keeping things intact here, mostly aiming, trying his absolute best to keep this game from getting completely out of control. But DAMWON, over the course of this, 40 minutes, was the better team. And I think a lot of that, again, was the bot lane. DECTUM and Kellen continuing to show up and continuing to be huge factors for DAMWON in this series. You have to be super excited for that if you're a DAMWON fan, because even with Canyon and Showmaker doing well in this series, DECTUM and Kellen were awesome. They were genuinely great. Kellen's going to get my player of the game here in Game 5. Without the Renata ults in some of these fights, it was game over. And even in lane, that was a huge problem for them. It was really difficult for Aiming to get a huge lead. It really took some later game team fights for Aiming to get a lot of gold onto him. So overall, just a really good game from Kellen. Really good series from DECTUM overall. Talking about the mid-jungle duo, though, that's really where KT started to flounder. Obviously, Aiming had a good game, but Cuz and Vikla did not. They finally banned Vikla's Sylas, and they forced him back onto something like the Talia, which he's just significantly worse on, quite frankly. Showmaker actually plays the Corki here, which I'm really not a huge fan of, but if it works, it works. He gets 10 kills, he gets super fed. That Corki's doing a bajillion damage in the late game. Canyon does a really good job of facilitating, being basically the full engage for this team with Bertle on what is essentially peel duty. Canyon does such a great job actively creating pressure all over the map as Wukong, completely out-jungling Cuz. Cuz had easily his worst game of the series here in Game 5, which is really unfortunate for KT, but you had to expect Cuz to drop off at some point. This is somebody who's been, quite frankly, incredibly inconsistent throughout the entirety of the split. Him having 5 straight games of being pretty good was just unlikely in any circumstance, so yeah, Cuz definitely gets outplayed here in Game 5. Canyon, Showmaker, DECTUM, Kellen. Even Bertle in the top lane, again, wasn't all that impactful, wasn't all that important in this game, but was still overall pretty good, and definitely didn't make any major mistakes to cause the game to be out of DAMWON's hands. As for KT, this has to be completely heartbreaking. You were in a position where I think if you 5v5 team fight, you at least have a chance to win this. I don't think it's all that likely, what with Corki and Aphelios both being online, and Renata potentially, if that hits Zeri, being a game-ending kind of ultimate, but the Zeri was hyper-fed. Aiming was in a position to be able to carry this game, and they just weren't able to actively compete on that. If they don't go for the Cloud Soul, obviously the game goes on for a bit. I definitely still think DAMWON probably wins here in Game 5, but it's a lot closer in that regard after the next, if they don't just basically give up their Nexus for free. Aiming definitely has a chance to be able to win these team fights. I just worry about the front line. But overall, Aiming played a good game, Life played a good game, Vikla played a good series, he just wasn't all that good off of the Sylas. Cuz was overall pretty good in the series, but completely ran it here in Game 5. Was definitely a problem on the Trundle, accomplished almost nothing in the entire game, and, that's a problem overall. Just, it felt like KT was the worst team in this game, and so, even with the crazy finish, I'd like to point out that DAMWON probably should have won this series, but what does this mean for the two teams? Well, KT's out of playoffs now, but they're not out yet because DRX actually lost earlier in the round. They have officially locked in Gauntlet because they get 5th place in the LCK playoffs, so, and not Gauntlet, but regional qualifiers because they adopted the LPL style. They are in the LPL regional qualifiers. They will be with whoever doesn't make finals, presumably. Obviously DRX will be there as well, so they still have a chance of making it to Worlds, and obviously if they can get some stuff together, they were very close to being able to win this series. They just have to clean up a few things. Macro, I think, is definitely one of them. And definitely, I think you need to find a second pick for Vikla, because in the 3 games he wasn't on Sylas in this series, he quite frankly was not good. So maybe you need to find another pick for Vikla, get Aiming in a position where he can take over the game, because that's clearly been your strategy. Hopefully Cuz can get a little bit more consistent. That's what you're looking at for KT now. It's all about the regional qualifiers. You have to put this heartbreaking of a defeat behind you. But for DAMWON, it is now second round time. We've got some previews later on, after this, basically, and it's going to be exciting. They definitely have an interesting matchup in the second round, and, what does this series show for them? I think player of the series here for me has to go to DECTUM as the AD carry. I actually thought he played out of his mind here. Probably one of his best, most consistent series as a member of DAMWON. Canyon and Showmaker at times were not super consistent, but DECTUM and Kellen were consistently winning in the bot lane against a good bot lane in Aiming and Life, so definitely a really good showing from them, and I hope they can continue that in the future rounds. But you know, this DAMWON team showed up here today. While it wasn't the most perfect of series, they are going to be moving on, and they've definitely given themselves a chance to be the big spoilers in the second round. But that's going to do it for my round 1 recaps in the LCK playoffs. It's time to jump in, and I'm actually going to do a little bit of a deep dive into our semi-final matchups now, as we know who is going to be playing later today. We're going to kick it off with the number 1 seed, because they had their choice between Liiv SANDBOX and DAMWON KIA as to who they actually wanted to play in the next round, and they chose SANDBOX. So Gen.G will be playing the 3 seed here. DK moves to the bottom side of the bracket. We'll get to that matchup in a bit, but let's talk about Gen.G versus Liiv SANDBOX here in the semifinals. A lot of people, I think, were really shocked by this decision. I wasn't. I actually predicted this at least a little bit, not fully, but at least a little bit in my preview, where I said if DK made it through, I can see a world where Gen.G would just rather play SANDBOX. And that's the world we live in. They would rather play SANDBOX, and I get it. I feel like they definitely feel like they have a good matchup against SANDBOX, and I agree. I think the matchup against SANDBOX is actually pretty in favor of Gen.G, but let's go over Gen.G just a tad bit. Obviously, Doran, Peanut, Chovy, Ruler, Lehens is the most talented starting 5 in the LCK, maybe in the world. I don't think a lot of people are really going to argue that, and it's going to be really hard for them to go, you know, for me to look at SANDBOX and be like, oh, one-on-one, they're really in a good spot. So let's talk about what SANDBOX does well. Well, what SANDBOX does well is play around their main carry in Prince. And Kale and Closer and Krocko have really been dedicated to making that happen. Obviously, Closer he's kind of backed off the Azir a bit here, moved a little bit closer to the Ahri, a little bit closer to the Sylas, picks that I think are a little bit more advantageous towards these macro plays. Krocko obviously loves those engaged bruisers here. The Vi comes to mind. The Poppy as well is something that he loves to pull out. But a lot of these things are things that, honestly, Gen.G does a really good job at stopping. Where is Gen.G's big power point of the map? Well, unfortunately, it's in the bot lane as well. So if you want to get that lead on Prince, it's probably going to have to come at the expense of either Ruler or Lehens. And while that is technically possible with Lehens being super aggressive, I don't know how likely that is. And then I think a really interesting matchup, probably the most interesting matchup outside of my key matchup in this series, is going to be Peanut versus Krocko. We've seen in the couple times that these two have played this year that Peanut has just been better than Krocko at doing what Krocko does. Obviously, Gen.G going 4-0 against Liiv SANDBOX this year is definitely telling, but Peanut was a big part of that in a lot of their series. Peanut has played really, really well. Overall, he was 3rd in my MVP voting for a reason. He was really, really good this year. I think there's really not a lot to say bad about him, and I think, quite frankly, he does a great job of facilitating the rest of his team. What has Krocko done well? What did I explain that Krocko did well in the series against DRX? He made sure that Closer was on the same page as him and made sure that bot lane was able to get ahead. Well, that's what Peanut's been doing, but with a better cast all year long. So I think Peanut Krocko could definitely be a part of the series where Gen.G gets a lot of pressure. And then also Doran and Dove in the top lane. Doran should have that locked up. Dove is one of the weaker, I would say, LCK top lanes, at least in terms of, you know, pressure. He's going to be put on tanks. His 3 most played champions are all tanks. He's going to be on Ornn duty if possible. If not, he'll be on the Gnar. He'll be on the Sejuani. He's going to want to just try to go even and go into the late game. But Doran's going to pressure him on that. His Gnar play is pretty unbelievable, and he also really likes to bring out that Gangplank and do a lot of damage. So Doran could very much become a problem for Dove, but you know, I don't think I'm going crazy here by saying that there's a pretty obvious choice for key matchup of the series between these two teams. It's going to be between Ruler and Prince. I'm not going crazy, right? Like, I'm not going to overthink this. I'm not going to overdo it. Ruler and Prince is the key matchup. These are the 2 best AD carries in the LCK this year. It's not all that close. I think you could, you know, for me, they were my number 1 and number 2 in my MVP voting. I think these were the 2 most important players to their teams in the LCK, and I don't think it was all that close. You can even look at the stats, and they will kind of show that. Ruler, 1st in GD at 15, 2nd in damage percentage, 2nd in damage per gold, 1st in damage per minute, 1st in KDA. Ruler dominated this split, and he very much deserved his MVP, but Prince, on that same track, 2nd in gold difference at 15, only behind Ruler, 2nd in kill percentage. Like, that's nuts. 3rd in damage percentage, only behind Ruler. 3rd in damage per minute, 2nd in KDA. Like, it's nuts how close and how good both of these two are and how important they are for their teams. Obviously, Ruler, I think, has a little bit of a better team surrounding him, but Prince is like the heart and soul of Liiv SANDBOX. Without him, this team does not function all that well, And it's not to say that, they don't have a lot of good players outside of him, but this team is entirely predicated on investing resources into him and having him be the late game carry. If Ruler can get ahead and stop that from happening, Prince and by proxy Liiv SANDBOX are put in a significantly more difficult position. It's what we've seen mostly throughout the year in these matchups, is that Peanut does a great job of getting Ruler ahead, and he's just able to take over these late games because he's better than Prince. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be the entire series, because Prince honestly has looked pretty unstoppable when he gets ahead, and it really isn't that hard to get Prince a lead. Even if Ruler does get a lead, Prince can obviously match him if they do some stuff, if Lehen starts playing over-aggressive. There is a world in which Prince is still a menace in the late game, and it is really difficult for Gen.G to actively deal with him, and I think that is the series that I would most be looking forward to. Now, I am going to talk about this a little bit. I didn't want to go into it too much, but obviously there's been some controversy on Twitter over the last day or so when Cubby tweeted out that Ruler Prince is going to be the best bot lane matchup we see in the world in playoffs, and people got really mad at him. They're like, oh, Viper Gala, oh, Jackie Levin, anybody, or Fodic and anybody, and it's like, I just don't get the outrage. Like, I tweeted this out. Like, I don't understand. Even if I don't agree, which I don't, I would still probably take Viper Gala as my number one. Like, at worst, Ruler Prince is, like, top 3, right? Like, top 4. Just because he's not your number, like, this isn't your number 1, doesn't mean you can't appreciate that this is an awesome matchup to get in the playoffs, and we are very lucky to be able to see two of the players that mean the most to their teams in the bot lane role go up against each other. Like, I don't understand why this has to be such a contentious topic. And I won't even get into my thoughts on Prince versus some of the LPL AD carries anyways, but, like, at worst, this is a top 3-ish matchup of any AD carries in the playoffs. I don't understand why that causes so much vitriol in people, but maybe I'm just overreacting. Maybe people actually see the light here, and it's just a lot of credited analysts kind of saying, like, you're insane for thinking this, and I really don't think they're insane for thinking this. So, yeah, this is my key matchup of the series, and I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully, we get that version where both Prince and Ruler are popping off. I think that would be the most entertaining series between these two teams, but, overall, I think Gen.G's in a pretty good spot as long as they can stop this matchup from going LSP's way. That's going to bring us to our second semifinal series here. And it's the two teams that we have yet to talk about here. T1 taking on DAMWON Kia. Obviously, we talked about DAMWON here in their win over KT, but this is going to be T1's first playoff series, just as it was for Gen.G. So let's talk about this matchup. T1 went 4-0 in the regular season, and honestly, the games were closer than that score would indicate. Actually, they get multiple points this season. DAMWON was in a position to at least take games off of T1, but really, T1 is a team that steps up to their opponent. And that can be good when they're playing good teams, and that can be bad when they're playing bad teams. So, they go up against DAMWON here. I think this is going to be relatively good for T1. Obviously, a little bit of a funny thing here with Bertle. I don't actually have any champions listed for him because he didn't play in the regular season. So, I don't really know what to list for him. But, this is definitely going to be an interesting series. I assume Bertle's playing. Nuguri might be back in here if the neck injury is fixed. I don't think it changes all that much, quite frankly. I think Nuguri is definitely the better player, but it doesn't really change, like, that much for the team. But let's talk about, where T1 has been positive and where I think DAMWON can be positive in this matchup. T1 has definitely been playing mostly around their mid lane the entire year. And mostly around jungle, I would say, because that jungle mid has definitely been your focal point, right? Like, Faker likes to play the Galio and the Lissandra and these more supportive picks, and they like to play around him to go to other lanes and participate and get people ahead. And a lot of times, honestly, that was top lane. I really don't see that changing a lot in this series. I think Zeus versus Bertle could be an extremely exploitable matchup for T1, and I could definitely see that as something that Owner or Faker wants to go to throughout multiple points. Gumayushi has also gotten a lot of flack for how he's played for a majority of the year. I don't agree with that flack. He was very close to my All-Pro team, and I think him and Keria have a great duo-ship. I think if you put Gumayushi on the Draven, on the Zeri, on the Sivir, I really expect him to be able to pull this off in a very, very strong way. And I think a lot of people would generally be surprised with how good Guma is going to play in this series. Obviously, Dectum and Kellen, coming off of what was arguably their best series of the year here in the playoffs against KT Rolster, could definitely be a fun series to watch there. But obviously, the classic here, Faker and Showmaker in the mid lane. Probably the two arguably best mid laners, Chovy in there as well, that the LCK has ever seen in terms of peak performance. Maybe not in terms of longevity, but in terms of just pure, like, at their best. Faker Showmaker is one of those matchups. Showmaker not playing all that hot right now. You would want to give the edge to Faker, but we forget that Faker was also not that hot for a considerable amount of the year. Yes, he picked it up towards the back half when he started playing more of those aggressive picks, the Azir, the Ahri. But at the end of the day, like, this team doesn't really want to focus through Faker. That's never really been something that they wanted to do. They want to try to get Zeus and Owner some early leads and then move it over to Gumayushi for the late game carry. It really Faker's been on these more supportive style picks, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see if he flip-flops, kind of switches roles in between games, or if they try to settle on one strategy or another for T1. But for DAMWON, like I said in the previous series, like, DAMWON and Kellen were the focal points, which is kind of insane. Showmaker did a great job of playing the Talia, playing these, more supportive picks to help out in the bottom lane. For the most part, he really didn't have to be a signature carry. He obviously picked up the Corki in Game 5, and he did a really good job on it, but that Talia game in Game 2 was really strong, was really help enabling DAMWON and Kellen to do exactly what they wanted. Canyon in a similar boat doesn't actually need to be the carry for this team anymore. They put Bertle on weak side duty, and they focused on bot lane. That's, at least, it seemed what they wanted to do in the first series. It'll be interesting to see if they want to go back to that in game, or in the series 2 here in the semifinals, but, definitely not locked in or anything like that. I think DK is a little bit more flexible than expected. But looking forward to the key matchup of the series, for me, it is going to be our jungle matchup here between Owner and Canyon. I think this is definitely going to determine a lot of what happens here. Both of these teams basically run through these two players, whether it be T1 trying to make plays in the top lane and then later in the game with Gumayushi and protecting him in the bottom lane through Owner, or Canyon being the one that basically is the feast or famine for DAMWON. When Canyon is on, this team very, very rarely loses. When he's off, they can sometimes be in a little bit of trouble. They're relying on players like Dekdom to show up and to really be a big deal. So, and you can see that in his damage percent and his damage per minute. Canyon is a big deal for his team, and so is Owner. Owner obviously #1 in KP percentage. That's huge. So #2 in gold difference of 15 as well. So both of these players I think are really influential and important to their teams, and I think this jungle matchup, depending on how it goes, especially in the early game, could very much dictate a lot of what happens in this series. If Owner is able to get Zeus and Guma ahead, I think T1's in a really good spot. If Canyon's having a great game and he gets a lot of gold on himself or can get gold on Showmaker or Dekdom, I think DK is actually in a surprisingly good spot there as well, maybe more so than a lot of people would predict. And I think that this matchup, in my opinion, is a lot closer than people are going to predict. Even if Canyon isn't playing his best, he still is Canyon at the end of the day. And so I have to imagine that he's at least going to be relatively good in this series. He was relatively good in the previous one. He had some couple down games, but he had some big ones as well. So for me, Owner versus Canyon is going to be my matchup of the series here for T1 versus DK, and I think it really will decide which one of these teams comes out on top. All right, that is going to do it for my round 1 analysis in the LCK. We ran a little bit over. I talked quite a bit about these series, but they were interesting. There was a lot of good stuff to talk about, and I think there was quite a lot of good action to discuss, not only in the series that happened, but in the previews. So up on the screen, you're going to see the updated bracket. You already know it. We went over the games. You know what's happening, so hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot for the channel. I'm loving pumping out this content, and I really hope you guys are enjoying it as well. Let me know your predictions for the semifinals down in the comment section below. Gen.G LSB, T1 DK. As you guys know, I have Gen.G and T1 moving on to the finals, but I do think it'll be a lot closer than people expect, especially T1 DAMWON. I think it'd very much go maybe 5 games, but that's only if DK actually shows up. There's a good chance they don't as well. It could very well be a 3-0 T1, so definitely interesting, but overall, some fun ones, and let me know how you feel about them down below. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.